Well, thank you very much indeed, London, for that welcome. I don't always get that welcome in some parts of London. It is wonderful to be on a cross-party platform tonight, some from all parties and some in no parties at the moment. I want to say how wonderful it is that we're here in the capital city of the United Kingdom, but we're also here, of course, in the headquarters of the organisers, of those in big business, in the media, in some of the political parties at leadership level, and of course ex-prime ministers who have spent their time doing everything, not just before the referendum, but since, to thwart the view of the British people made in that referendum. And I see Tony Blair. Thank you, thank you. I'd hope for that even in London, yes. Even today, Tony Blair is continuing to make that case for a second referendum. And yet that referendum was supported by the overwhelming numbers of members of Parliament. Absolutely clear that they voted to have the referendum. And a referendum was voted in by many people across the country who'd given up on politics, or who had never voted because they actually felt that politicians never listened to them. And they thought this time that if they voted Leave, and Leave won, then something special and something specific would change, and their vote would have mattered at last. They were promised, they were even warned repeatedly that the result would be enacted. It was, according to David Cameron, to be a once-in-a-lifetime vote. Now, my view of a lifetime is, I hope, more than what a mole has, I think, of 3 years. It is meant to be the lifetime of people. But despite the dire warnings and the accusations that we all heard of being stupid and racist and not understanding, 17.4 million people defied the establishment and voted to leave. And I was so proud that 70% of constituencies that voted Leave had Labour MPs. That's a very important figure to remember. 2 days after the referendum, my 95-year-old mother, who was a long-time critic of the EU, said to me, Catherine, because that's what I'm known at home as, "You know, dear, they will never let us leave." And I said, "Oh, don't be silly, Mummy. You know, that's ridiculous. We live in a democracy. Parliament could never, ever go against that decision." I'm beginning to think that my mother was right. Let us be clear, the majority of MPs in Parliament currently are Remainers. They voted to remain. It is a Remain Parliament, and many of them have spent their time conspiring to do everything possible to stop us leaving. The lawyers, and there are many of them in the House of Commons, have had a field day, backed up, but I'm afraid to say, by a speaker who himself had bollocks to Brexit on his car. And yet that very same Parliament, for years, and I've been an MP 30 years next year, let treaty after treaty after treaty go through without ever, ever asking the British people did they want to lose their sovereignty more and more to the EU. So Parliament, I am very clear. I am very clear indeed, and the public should be very clear, that no amendment in Parliament can override the legal position. No parliamentary vote, in my view, can be allowed to stop us leaving. We handed the decision to the people, and the people have decided. I think this is a very dangerous time for democracy in our country. The public are getting tired of politicians using their manifestos to get elected and then abandoning them. And just look at the manifesto of both the Conservatives and Labour last year. Neither party have kept to their commitments on the EU. And we've seen the dissatisfaction and the anger right across most other EU countries when politicians fail to listen to people. I and my other Labour colleagues in Labour Leave represent the great Labour tradition of patriotism, true internationalism, and faith in the common sense of the British people. My first election that I stood in 1983 was on a manifesto that a Labour government would leave the European Economic Community. The tradition of Attlee, Benn, Gateskill, Peter Shore, and of course on the 100th anniversary of women voting for the first time, the charismatic Barbara Castle. And she made clear in 1971 in some great speeches when you look back to Parliament of just what joining the common market would lead to. And she was absolutely right. And if only the Labour Party now and Jeremy Corbyn was able to be true to his own instincts, we could be 10 points ahead in the polls. I know the Conservatives here won't like that, but we need to get back to our traditional Labour anti-European Union position. I don't believe... Now, I don't believe that the Prime Minister ever really understood what motivated that huge Leave vote. Yes, she said Brexit means Brexit, but her idea of Brexit is not taking back sovereignty. Her withdrawal deal would still give control to the European Court of Justice. She spent more than 2 years cozying up to the EU, asking them for a half-baked deal that keeps us as close to their institutions as possible. And that's what the establishment have always wanted, that we would stay as close as possible, in theory leaving, but actually still being in the EU. She plays tough with our Parliament, disgracefully pulling the vote at the last minute, whilst at the same time continually pushing the mantra that the EU will give us more. The EU will never, ever willingly give us anything. They don't... The European Union do not want the United Kingdom to be successful. They don't want us to be competitive. They don't want us to have trading deals with those Commonwealth countries who led the world and lead the world in economic development, like India, Singapore, Malaysia, all wanting to work with us in the Commonwealth family. But they don't want us to have power to make our own rules either, and laws in our own country. They have ruthlessly, in my view, exploited the weakness of our negotiators, who, as the eminent Martin Howe QC said very succinctly, that our negotiators have been as flexible as a limp lettuce. And it genuinely makes me angry and makes my blood boil when I see our Prime Minister, no matter how much I disagree with her, when I see her being humiliated in Brussels. Because that is our country that is being humiliated. The withdrawal agreement is a complete sellout and has to be defeated. We didn't vote for a deal. We voted to leave the European Union, and we knew what that meant. Why do our politicians from across Parliament not have more confidence in our country's ability to thrive and prosper outside the EU? There is a deliberate campaign to make a managed exit on world trade terms seem unthinkable. Journalists, many of them I had huge respect for, but journalists on some of our supposedly great political programmes do everything to stop any explanation of what this would mean. We saw that. And I like to get my little BBC dig in. I think we saw that on Newsnight the other night with Kirsty Wark, absolutely shockingly not allowing John Redwood to get a word in about why World Trade Organization rules would be perfectly sensible. So they use the word catastrophic. They use it all the time. Well, I'll tell you what is catastrophic. It's leaving us locked into the EU, but without a voice, being half in, half out, a vassal state still paying vast sums of money each year until they finally deign, if ever, to give us a trade agreement. Just think how different it would have been if the government was led by a Prime Minister who actually believed in Brexit. How on earth could we ever have agreed to sign a legally binding agreement just giving away, as been said earlier, £39 billion in advance of a single promise on trade? How could any UK Prime Minister agree a deal that separates out Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom? Just another of the Prime Minister's broken promises when she said no border down the Irish Sea. Now, you're going to be entertained, and I really do mean entertained, later by Sammy Wilson, so I'm not going to go into the border issue in a lot more detail. But as someone who grew up in Northern Ireland and proud, very proud to be pro-union, I feel very strongly about this. We didn't spend in Northern Ireland 30 years stopping IRA terrorists, killing soldiers, police and civilians in order to get a united Ireland, to allow a few jumped-up EU bureaucrats and a complicit Prime Minister to try to do the same thing by the back door. And even more ridiculously is that it would not even be in the interests, the economic interests of Northern Ireland, who depends so much on the trade to and from Great Britain. So why is a British Prime Minister dancing to the Irish Taoiseach's tune? There is no need for a hard border and there is no need for a backstop. Now, nearly finished. The Chancellor wants apparently to flush out extremists. And I don't think he meant just in his own party. I think he meant all of us. He wants to... And, you know, this is... I mean, it's actually... It's funny, but it's actually quite serious that you have a government senior figure calling the majority of the country extremists. Well, those who want to give our sovereignty away and forever prevent trade deals and welcome the EU court in looking at what we do, to me, those are the extremists. So, I do not, for all those people calling for a second referendum, a people's vote, a loser's vote, whatever you want to call it, I do not fear the result of another referendum. I genuinely think that the vote to leave would be bigger than before, but I fear the precedent that it would set. And why should we? The people have already spoken, and now their orders have to be carried out. Let us keep the faith here. Let us be optimistic. Let us make sure, because we know that we are on the right side of history. We need to keep united, we need to keep strong, and we will win. Thank you.